In 1488, a Portuguese captain named Bartolomeu Dias did something no European had ever done. He sailed around the bottom of Africa, proving that the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean were connected. The door to Asia, the door Portugal had been hammering on for almost a century, was finally open. And then, nothing happened. For nearly 10 years, nobody walked through it. Why? Why would a kingdom that had spent decades and a fortune inching down the African coast suddenly stop at the finish line? And when they finally did sail for India, why did the voyage nearly end in mutiny, disaster, and a graveyard of dead sailors, even as it succeeded? This is the story of the most important boat trip in history that almost nobody finished alive. Let's get into it. First, that strange decade of silence. The delay wasn't laziness. It was politics, money, and fear. King John II, the man who had sent Dias, was cautious. A voyage all the way to India would be staggeringly expensive and staggeringly risky. There were also secrets to protect. Portugal had spent years quietly mapping this route, and the last thing it wanted was to hand the map to a rival. And there was a new rival, a big one. In 1492, while Portugal hesitated, a Genoese captain sailing for Spain went the opposite direction, west, straight across the open Atlantic, and came back claiming he'd reached the edge of Asia. We'll come back to him. For now, just know this: Spain was suddenly in the game, and the race to reach the riches of the East had a clock on it. Then King John died in 1495, and the crown passed to a young, ambitious cousin, Manuel I. Manuel wanted glory, and he wanted it fast. He dusted off the old plan and chose a commander, not a famous explorer, not a seasoned admiral, a tough, little-known nobleman with a reputation for being ruthless and absolutely unshakable, Vasco da Gama. In July of 1497, da Gama's fleet slipped out of Lisbon. For ships, around 170 men, and supplies for years at sea. They carried padros, stone pillars stamped with the Portuguese coat of arms, to plant on new shores. They carried trade goods to dazzle the kings of the East. And they carried, though they didn't know it yet, almost no idea of what they were actually sailing into. The crowd that watched them leave probably assumed they'd hug the African coastline, the way every Portuguese voyage had for 60 years. Instead, da Gama did something that still amazes historians today. Once past the bulge of West Africa, instead of following the coast south, he turned his ships and sailed out, away from land, deep into the empty South Atlantic. He swung in a gigantic arc, thousands of miles wide, out toward the coast of what's now Brazil, and back. It looked insane. He was deliberately sailing away from his destination. But it was genius. Da Gama, using decades of hard-won Portuguese knowledge about the winds, knew the coastal route meant fighting headwinds the entire way. Out in the open ocean, there were belts of wind that would curve him back south and east, slingshotting him toward the Cape. The result: 93 days out of sight of any land. The longest open ocean voyage Europeans had ever made, far longer than Columbus's hop across the Atlantic. His crew didn't see so much as a tree for over 3 months. When they finally hit land again, they were almost exactly where they wanted to be, near the southern tip of Africa. The navigation was nearly perfect, but rounding the Cape of Good Hope was every bit as brutal as its reputation. Storms battered the little fleet. The crew, exhausted and terrified, came close to mutiny, begging to turn back. Da Gama's answer, according to legend, was to throw the navigational instruments overboard and declare there was no turning back. They would reach India or die. Whether or not that exact moment happened, it captures the man perfectly. They rounded the Cape and sailed into a world Europe knew almost nothing about. Now here's where the story gets humbling. The Portuguese thought of themselves as the most advanced sailors on Earth, arriving to enlighten a backward world. Then they reached the east coast of Africa, the Swahili Coast, and got a shock. This was not a wild, empty shore. It was a string of wealthy, sophisticated city-states: Mozambique, Mombasa, Malindi, full of coralstone palaces and crowded harbors. These were rich Muslim trading hubs, plugged into a commercial network that stretched across the entire Indian Ocean to Arabia, India, and China. They dealt in gold, ivory, silk, and spices. Ships far larger than da Gama's came and went. Merchants here spoke many languages and handled currencies from a dozen lands. And then this scruffy band of Portuguese showed up with their finest trade goods. Little bells, cheap cloth, beads, and tin trinkets. To the merchants of the Swahili Coast, it was almost comical. These weren't impressive foreign envoys. They looked like poor, rough pirates from some unknown backwater. The welcome was frosty and often hostile. At Mombasa, the tension nearly boiled over into open violence. Da Gama, certain there was a plot against him, tortured prisoners for information and kept his guard up day and night. But a little further north, in Malindi, his luck finally turned. The ruler of Malindi was a bitter rival of Mombasa and saw these strange newcomers as useful allies. He gave them a warm welcome, fresh supplies, and the single most valuable thing they could have asked for: a pilot, an experienced navigator who knew the Indian Ocean intimately and could read the monsoon winds that no European yet understood. With that pilot aboard, Da Gama's ships caught the monsoon and crossed the Indian Ocean in just 23 days. After 10 months and the entire length of Africa, the last great leap was almost easy. On the 20th of May, 1498, the Portuguese dropped anchor off a city on the southwest coast of India. They had done it. They had reached Calicut, the spice capital of the world, entirely by sea. This should have been the triumphant climax. In a way, it was the anticlimax of the century. Calicut was dazzling. A huge, rich, cosmopolitan port ruled by a Hindu king called the Zammarin, and dominated commercially by wealthy Arab merchants who had traded there for centuries. And those merchants took one look at the Portuguese and understood exactly what they were: competition. Unwelcome competition. Then came the gifts. When Da Gama sent his offering to the Zammarin, the king's officials actually laughed. 12 pieces of striped cloth, some hats, strings of coral, a few wash basins, a box of sugar, and some jars of oil and honey. This was the kind of present you might give a minor chief on the African coast. To the ruler of one of the richest trading cities on earth, it was an insult. The poorest merchant in Calicut, they sneered, would have given more. The Portuguese had crossed half the planet and shown up looking like beggars. And here's one of the strangest moments of the whole voyage. The Portuguese had set out partly looking for Christians. There was an old European legend of a powerful Christian king somewhere in the east. So when they were led into a grand Hindu temple in Calicut, full of statues and rich decoration, they convinced themselves it was a church. They knelt and prayed before an image of a Hindu goddess, believing they were honoring the Virgin Mary. They were so sure the East was full of lost Christians that they simply saw what they expected to see. It would be years before Europeans truly understood that India's faiths were something else entirely. Things in Calicut went downhill from there. The Arab merchants worked to turn the Zammarin against the newcomers. Negotiations stalled and grew tense. At one point, the Portuguese were nearly trapped. Some were briefly held, deals collapsed, suspicion ran both ways. But Da Gama, stubborn as ever, refused to leave empty-handed. He managed to trade for a cargo of pepper and cinnamon, a modest load by local standards, and in August of 1498, with relations souring fast, he ordered the fleet to sail for home before he lost everything. And now the voyage tried to kill them. On the way out, Da Gama had a pilot and the cooperation of the monsoon. On the way back, he had neither. He chose to leave at the wrong time of year, against the advice of local sailors, and sailed straight into the teeth of the monsoon winds. The crossing that had taken 23 days going out took more than 3 months coming back. 3 months of dead calm and contrary winds, with food rotting and water running out. And then scurvy came for them. The same disease we talked about last time, caused by the lack of fresh food, returned with a vengeance. Men's gums swelled and rotted. Their teeth fell out. Their old wounds split open. Sailors died one after another, day after day. By the time they reached the African coast again, so many were dead that there weren't enough men left alive to sail all the ships. Da Gama gave the order to burn one of his own vessels, the São Rafael. There was simply no one left to crew her. The survivors limped back around Africa and up the Atlantic, and in the summer of 1499, the battered remnants of the fleet straggled into Lisbon. Of the roughly 170 men who had set out 2 years earlier, only around 50 or 60 came home. 2 of the 4 ships were gone. Da Gama's own brother, Paulo, had died on the journey. By any human measure, it was a catastrophe. And by the cold measure of empire, it was one of the most successful voyages in history, because that modest cargo of spices bought cheaply in India, sold in Europe for a fortune, enough to pay for the entire ruinous expedition many times over. The math was undeniable. A sea route to India existed, and whoever controlled it would be unimaginably rich. King Manuel understood instantly. He began styling himself Lord of the Conquest, Navigation and Commerce of Ethiopia, Arabia, Persia, and India. A title that was mostly fantasy in 1499, but wouldn't stay that way for long. Within 2 years, Portugal sent a far bigger, heavily armed fleet east. The age of polite, clumsy trading was over. Because here's the honest, darker half of the story. The Portuguese quickly realized they couldn't outtrade the established Arab and Indian merchant networks. They were too small, too poor, too far from home. So they chose a different strategy: violence. They had one thing the Indian Ocean's trading world did not: ships built for war, bristling with cannon. On his second voyage, Vasco da Gama returned to Calicut and bombarded the city. He attacked ships, seized cargo, and committed brutal acts against civilians and pilgrims to force the region to trade on Portuguese terms. The sea route to India opened a door to a genuine wonder. A connected world, the meeting of distant cultures, an explosion of trade and knowledge. And it opened the door to conquest, coercion, and centuries of European empire in Asia. Both came through the same door on the same ships. As always, we can admire the staggering courage and skill and refuse to look away from the cost. So that's how it really happened. The sea route Europe had chased for 100 years was finally won. Not by a grand fleet on a smooth voyage, but by a few battered ships, a stubborn captain, a borrowed pilot, and a crew that mostly didn't make it home. Vasco da Gama broke Venice's ancient monopoly overnight and redrew the map of global trade. Lisbon, not Venice, would now be the gateway to the riches of the East. But remember that other captain, the one we set aside near the beginning? 6 years before da Gama reached India by sailing east around Africa, a stubborn Genoese dreamer had tried to reach those exact same riches by doing the opposite, sailing west, straight into the open Atlantic, convinced the world was small enough to get to Asia the back way. He was wrong about almost everything. His math was off, his maps were a fantasy, and he never did reach Asia. And it might just be the most important mistake anyone has ever made, because he ran into something nobody in Europe knew was there at all. Next time, we sail west with Christopher Columbus into the greatest accident in history. If you enjoyed this, subscribe and I'll see you there.